All right, 4 chapters today, Isaiah 45 through 48. And these chapters actually talk a lot about two different nations, Persia, through the mention of the ruler Cyrus, and Babylon. Now, when Isaiah lived, Babylon was not a world power. It was actually a vassal state. So it was a subject kind of nation or city or region under Assyria. But Babylon would rise to overthrow Assyria and would be the nation that destroyed the walls and the temple in Jerusalem. Babylon was the force, the empire that carried first the elite and then two other conquests, essentially carrying a large number of people from the southern kingdom of Judah, Israel, Isaiah's nation, carrying them into exile from the promised land because God's covenant people had failed to live in covenant loyalty to God. And Persia would become the empire that freed the Jews, freed God's people from Babylon, and under King Cyrus allowed those who had been exiled, gave opportunity for them to return to the land promised by God to the descendants of Abraham. But over these kingdoms and over these rulers, Persia, Babylon, Assyria, Judah, Israel, above all, and above all the other gods, is Yahweh. And Yahweh, here notice when you read the text, he calls Cyrus his servant. Now, this is not the servant of the Lord. And calling Cyrus a servant here doesn't mean Cyrus was in a personal relationship with Yahweh. The dynamic of the text here is that Cyrus is being used by God to accomplish God's purposes in bringing destruction to Babylon, which was God's judgment for Babylon's evil, but also God's purpose for freeing the covenant people of God to return to the promised land, to, in a sense, begin again. After exile was kind of a reboot of God's people to be that salt and light, to be a light to the nations, going all the way back to Exodus 19. Now, Isaiah lived about 150-ish years before Cyrus became king of Persia, and so about 100 or so years before the exile in Babylon even happened. And there's all sorts of conversations about how did Isaiah know, or, there's all sorts of debates that happen, and it can be interesting, but I want to talk here in this devotion about why Isaiah was given this message. And it's clearly stated in the passage. Isaiah wanted, well, God wanted through Isaiah, the people to know that when freedom, when rescue was going to come, when it came, it was Yahweh, it was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who had brought about their freedom, not Cyrus and his gods, not the gods of Babylon or any other, but Yahweh was the true one who had acted to see this happen. I want to read these verses out of chapter 48. It's verses 5 to 11. And Isaiah is kind of giving this message from God. And basically, starting with, I know how stubborn you are. And then comes verse 5. That is why I told you what would happen. I told you beforehand what I was going to do. Then you could never say, my idols did it. My wooden image and metal god commanded it to happen. There's a lot of heavy sarcasm there when it comes to the idols and wooden image and metal god. Verse 6, you've heard my predictions and seen them fulfilled, but you refuse to admit it. Now I will tell you new things, secrets you have not yet heard. They are brand new, not things from the past, so you cannot say, we knew that all the time. Yes, I will tell you of things that are entirely new, things you never heard of before, for I know so well what traitors you are. You've been rebels from birth. Remember, this is to God's own people he's saying these words. Yet for my own sake and for the honor of my name, I will hold back my anger and not wipe you out. I have refined you, but not as silver is refined. Rather, I have refined you in the furnace of suffering. I will rescue you for my sake. Yes, for my own sake. I will not let my reputation be tarnished, and I will not share my glory with idols. I want to remind us that God clearly is saying here that God didn't rescue the people of Judah from Babylon for their sake. He rescued them for his sake. And this is not about God's ego being bruised or anything of that. It's from this: if the Gentile nations saw or thought that God was powerless because of the state of his people, they would not seek him and find life. Remember, the people of Judah, God's covenant people, from Abraham, covenant of Moses, us today. Our purpose is to glorify God and enjoy him, to reflect him. And that's what we're called to do. And that's what God wants to do in and through us. Sorry, folks, life is not about you. And that's a good thing, because our freedom only comes from God and no other. May the Lord bless you and keep you today. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you. And today, would you know his peace? God bless.